Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? My name's Morgan Colby. As you can see, Rick is not with me this week. Busy week for both of us, so we couldn't link up schedules. But I am here. I'm ready. Rick's going to bring you a show. He's going to bring you the next show, the later this week show. But today, and for the next 4 or 5 shows, you are going to be going through, or we are going to be going through, I should say, rankings for the 2022 fantasy football season. It is going to be a wild time. Obviously, Rick and I would love to converse on our rankings and talk about, the differences of why we have guys where we do, all that good stuff. But Rick's going to give you quarterbacks and tight ends. I'm going to give you wide receivers. We'll come together on the running backs, I hope. And then we're going to talk about our top 50 players all together. So once we finish our rankings, we'll have the top 50 players that we'll go through. And we'll talk about our individual guys, make note of some players that are higher or lower, just chat about the overall rankings quickly. But on this show, we are going to talk about wide receiver rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. If I said 2022 earlier, I apologize. Don't click out. But for the 2023 fantasy football season, we're going to talk about wide receivers and where they rank for me, specifically the top 12. Maybe we'll get into some more after that if I have time. But without further ado, we'll do that. Before we do, check out our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcast platforms, please leave a review and share this pod with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and leave who your number 5 ranked player is in fantasy football. So rankings, super important to fantasy football. Not only just, I try to mix together, obviously I have my own rankings of players that I like, but I like to look at the consensus as well, because it kind of gives you an idea. If you go to fantasypros.com, there's an expert consensus rank with all the fantasy community together, and that rank really kind of gives you an indication of A, where the fantasy community is at, but also B, where everyone generally is at with a specific player. And, some people might be higher or lower on a certain player based on their rankings, but that kind of gives you a temperature check on specific players. Garrett Wilson, super high. Right now he's 10 on the expert consensus. Everyone's really excited about him. We'll obviously probably talk about him on today's show, but that kind of gives you a temperature check on where people are at. You combine that with the ADP, and you can see some trends and some variables that match up. And using that, hey, I got to take this player in this spot in a draft. So I think those things are very crucial and very important to have. Rankings are very crucial and very important to have, not just the expert consensus ones, but also your personal rankings, because you have projected out those players. I would highly suggest that you pull out a piece of paper or build a spreadsheet and do your own rankings. And obviously you trust Rick and I, if you're listening to the show, to give you what our rankings are. And you can agree or disagree in the comments, but, and if you're playing fantasy football enough, you would have your opinions on your own players and you would disagree or agree. And some people are on this show looking for direct fantasy advice on who we think is going to be higher or lower and who we would take over who and all that good stuff. And obviously Rick's not here to counteract my opinions on the wide receivers, but in future shows, we will talk about that and we will discuss why the differences are there and what that means. But the other thing I really specifically like about rankings is I usually take them into my personal rankings. I take them into all of my redraft drafts, and I cross names out as I go, and I'll tier all of the players down. So, in your drafts when a guy goes off the board. If there's a run on wide receivers and the team in front of you needs a running back and there's a high-tiered running back, don't follow that run on wide receivers unless if the wide receivers, for example, are in tier 3 and you still have a tier 1 or tier 2 running back on the board, you got to go with that tier 1 or tier 2 running back. So having rankings kind of keeps you honest in your draft. If there's a situation where somebody snipes you, you've been in that situation in any draft that you've ever had, somebody snipes you and knocks you down the board, and you're like, dang it. You're prepared because you have your draft rankings, you know where guys are, you're not tied to a specific player in that moment, and you're prepared to overcome the snipe. So those are some good things and some good benefits of the rankings. Like I said, next show, Rick will go over quarterbacks and tight ends, and we'll discuss that. But I have wide receivers for you. So without further ado, we'll jump in and talk about the number one guy that I have on my list. It is a dead heat between two guys. I know Rick's rankings will most definitely have Justin Jefferson 1. I have Jamar Chase 1. And I will say, to me, it doesn't matter. I think if you're drafting a wide receiver as high as these guys have been going, taking them 1 and 2 interchangeably is fine. Like if you prefer Jamar Chase over Justin Jefferson, take him. If you prefer Justin Jefferson over Jamar Chase, take him. Personally, I like Jamar Chase. I think he has, I think as good as Justin Jefferson is, I think that Jamar Chase has best wide receiver in the NFL ceiling. One of the best wide receivers of all time ceiling. And I know that for some people might be a hot take. I don't know. But I think if you have an opportunity to get him, you have to get him. And I think that a lot of people look at Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and Justin Jefferson also in that same category. But I think that with the ceiling that Jamar Chase has and his ridiculous elite talent, not to mention the team around him, I think Jamar Chase, to me, is the guy that I would prefer to take as the first wide receiver off the board and the first wide receiver off my rankings. Now, Justin Jefferson is probably going 101, but anyway, so just a little bit on Jamar Chase. Obviously, last year, in 12 games played, he had 134 targets in just 12 games played last season. And so, obviously, that, you can imagine what that would have meant for this dude if he had played a full 16 games, and extrapolated out, he would have had 190 targets with Joe Burrow as his quarterback, 123 catches, 1,482 yards, 13 touchdowns, all that good stuff. It would have been an extremely impressive season for him. It's clear that Jamar Chase is the number one wide receiver for the Bengals, but it's clear that he's the most targeted guy. And I think when you're looking at a guy like Justin Jefferson, I like to look at all variables for wide receivers, right? And for wide receivers, it's very important that you have a good quarterback. It's very important that you have a good offense. It's very important that you have a good offensive line to have success. So there are rarities at the wide receiver position where a player has a ton of fantasy success. You look at the top 10 last year in fantasy football. I almost guarantee you, I'm not going to pull it up. Actually, I got it in front of me, so I'll pull it up. You look at the top 10 in fantasy football last year at the wide receiver position. Justin Jefferson, good offense, good quarterback. Tyreek Hill, good offense, decent quarterback. Devontae Adams, good offense, good quarterback. Or mid quarterback. Stefon Diggs, great quarterback, great offense. CeeDee Lamb, good quarterback, great offense. A.J. Brown, good quarterback, great offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown, quarterback's mid. This is where you start getting into that conversation. Waddle, we talked about Tyreek Hill, good offense. Devonta Smith, great wide receiver, but also had a good offense and a good quarterback. Amari Cooper was an outlier, in the top 10. So generally speaking, you usually at the wide receiver position, you want to be in a good offense or have a good quarterback. Both Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase do have both. But this goes back to me choosing which guy I would prefer to have in this situation, Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. And I say Jamar Chase specifically because he has a better quarterback. Quarterback to quarterback, he's a better quarterback than Justin Jefferson does. I think that the Cincinnati Bengals had a better offense than the Minnesota Vikings do. And not to mention that, the Bengals now have a better offensive line, which is going to give Joe Burrow a little bit more time to let those plays develop. One of the offensive linemen, whose name escaped me, came from the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know why I can't remember his name, but anyway, came from Kansas City. It was blocking for them. I think it was Orlando Brown, maybe? But anyway, he comes over. He was in a press conference the other day, said that he had, with Patrick Mahomes, the style of offense that they run, and with the wide receiver situation the way that it was, he had to block for long periods of time, 10, 12 seconds, just to keep Patrick Mahomes upright long enough to throw the football. And he said it would be a heck of a lot easier with the Bengals because, of the state of their offense and how fast things run in their offense. And, he'd only have to block for 6-7 seconds. And the fact that that's the case, it makes it a lot easier on him. So it's like, I think the offensive line is definitely going to be better with some of the additions that they've made. I think that the situation for them is going to be much better offensively. And I think that if Jamar Chase gets 190 targets next year, we are going to be losing our mind with the production that he puts up. So I definitely think he's got to be number one. Number two, obviously, Justin Jefferson. I made some arguments against him being the first guy off the board. Obviously, he's been ridiculous the last couple of years. In 17 games played, 184 targets last year, 1,935 air yards. Like, he was ripping the league apart. But like I said, it goes back to, I won't spend a lot of time on it. Fantastic wide receiver. I would be happy with him as my number one wide receiver on my team, just like I would be equally as happy with Jamar Chase. Only reason why he's lower for me is that situation with the quarterback, situation with the offense, where I think Cincinnati has a better offense, better quarterback, better situation overall. They're going to score more points. They're going to be behind in games, stuff like that. So I think that benefits Jamar Chase, and I think when you're taking the first quarterback off the first wide receiver off the board, your mentality is, I want the 101. Like, I want the 101 wide receiver. While Justin Jefferson is as safe a pick as you can get, I think Jamar Chase can be the wide receiver one. I think he's got a better shot of being the wide receiver one than Justin Jefferson. Disagree in the comments, feel free. But that is where I have those two guys ranked currently. Moving on to our next guy, number 3 would be Cooper Kupp. Now, this is a change for me. As good as Cooper Kupp was 2 years ago, and as disappointing of a season as Cooper Kupp had, I have a tough time ranking him 3 because of a couple of different reasons. And it's why I did not rank him 3 in our previous ranking shows and our early rankings. But it was because Cooper Kupp is coming off an ACL injury that hampered him last year. And it basically ended his season. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to get hurt again or he's going to be dealing with injuries all year. He's going to, it was so early in the season that he's probably going to fully recover. He'll be fine. He'll be ready for the start of the season. The problem is guys coming off that injury going into year 2 or going into the, year after their ACL injury, they kind of struggle. And that is my concern. We know Cooper Kupp is the only good wide receiver for the Rams. We know that Matt Stafford only likes to throw it to Cooper Kupp. We know all those things, which is why he needs to be ranked in the top 5, because he's going to catch over 100 passes. He's going to be in that vicinity. If you're talking about PPR and half PPR rankings, you're getting points for those receptions. He's going to be a guy that excels in that category, so you have to have him. Efficiency-wise, I don't really think that he's going to be amazing. And I think it's because the Rams have not gotten better in any way offensively. They've not made any improvements. They've not done anything to improve their offense. I think they'll be better than they were last year because they'll have Matt Stafford back and Cooper Kupp back, 2 of their best players. But I don't think that they made any strides to improve on their efficiency. Everyone thinks about, Cooper Kupp got hurt, Matt Stafford got hurt, and no one remembers the early part of the season where Stafford and Kupp was doing really good in fantasy football, but, Stafford was struggling and the offense wasn't good. And I think if there's a lack of offensive efficiency and a lack of efficiency in the passing game, like there was last year, which is something that I anticipate for this Rams team because the offensive line didn't really improve all that much, Cooper Kupp is going to be one of these guys, to me, that is going to catch a lot of passes, and he's going to be good for fantasy football, but he could be wide receiver 6, 7, or 8 instead of wide receiver 1, 2, or 3 because of that. And so I think just because of his consistency and his, production, and knowing that, if he stays on the field and he's healthy, he's going to get 10, 11, 12, 13 targets a game and catch 7, 8, 9, 10 passes a game. If he does that, you're obviously getting good production on a week-to-week basis, and there's obviously high upside for him as well of being the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football if efficiency is there for the Rams, right? So I think that's why he's 3, but I think it's more likely that he finishes 5 to 7 because of that lack of efficiency. I do love Cooper Kupp, but those are some cons. Like I said, the pros of him are very big. They are very large. And I say the pros of him being very large are the fact that, like I said, the receptions are there. If the efficiency's there, then he's definitely a top 3 wide receiver. And there's he does have the high floor where it's like very high floor, where even if he doesn't produce at a high level of efficiency, he's still going to provide a lot of fantasy point output and production on a week-to-week basis on a consistent level that you won't see from some of the guys underneath him. And so, it really is where Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson were a toss-up. For me, it's always been a toss-up between Cooper Kupp and the next guy on this list, number 4, Tyreek Hill. Love Tyreek Hill. He is, he actually kind of shocked me. I was out on Tyreek Hill last year a little bit, not because I was out, I was still drafting him in leagues and all of that stuff. I wasn't like, he's going to be a bust. But I was like, I don't know what Tua is going to do. I'm not really, we don't know what the offense is going to look like under the new head coach. He's going to a worse team with a worse quarterback. And then he puts up numbers that are absolutely insane, finishing as at the wide receiver position as the wide receiver 3 overall on the season. And he legitimately did not have Tua for a plethora of games. I mean, that's extremely impressive to me. So, I mean, Tyreek Hill proved me wrong last year. I'm not going to allow myself to get bit by that. The other thing is that he was, in 2021 with the Chiefs, he had 159 targets. This year, I thought that wouldn't increase with Miami. He had 170 targets in 17 games played. So there's a chance to me that Tyreek Hill gets into that 170 conversation again. They force feed him the ball. Great for PPR, great for half PPR. And then he'll also have that, because of the way that he plays the game, he's going to be a massive vertical threat for this football team. And because Jalen Waddle generally plays, all over the field, similar to Tyreek Hill, he's going to, he runs a lot of underneath routes. And he's going to be a situation where teams are going to have to worry about him underneath. They're going to have to worry about Tyreek Hill over the top. And when those two guys come together, it creates some magic. I love Tyreek Hill for fantasy football as long as he's healthy and he's on the field. Like I said, I'm going to assume everyone's healthy here. But he's going to be a top 5 fantasy wide receiver, and I would be okay with taking him in any range. His ADP right now is 6, so he is going in the first round, which is a very high value. But I'm okay with taking him there. I don't know. I'm okay with him being one of my top wide receivers. I'll say that. But so I mean that there's obviously great things for Tyreek Hill. To me, obviously, I think efficiency-wise, they were ridiculously good last year. I think there's going to be stuff that the Miami Dolphins, people are going to start figuring out with the Dolphins, and I think it's going to make efficiency a little bit harder for this guy. And his schedule isn't great next year. He's in one of the toughest divisions. He's got 3 good defenses he's got to play twice a year. So, I mean, you're going to be, there's going to be a lot of weeks where Tyreek Hill maybe doesn't produce, and that's why he's not produce, but he's going to have tougher weeks a lot of the time that are going to stress you out. So that's why I would say that he's probably number 4 for me, but he's still going to be really good, still going to be really efficient. Number 5, CeeDee Lamb. Love CeeDee Lamb. He is one of my favorite players in fantasy football. He and A.J. Brown have been my darlings for a long time. I love both of these guys. Right now his ADP is 10-7. Last year he had 156 targets, 107 catches, so he became the number one guy on this team. Now Dallas did run out and add Brandon Cooks. They still have Michael Gallup, who's going to come back from that, will fully come back from that injury. This is going to be his first full season back from the ACL injury he got a couple years ago. So with these two guys, this offense now has three really good wide receiver options. They've been in and out on the DeAndre Hopkins situation. If he is signed, by the way, I apologize. I don't know what's going on with that. But CeeDee Lamb, he's still the number one wide receiver on this team. I do think he might take a targets hit with Brandon Cooks coming in because Dak likes to spread it around. But even if he's at 135 targets, he should be fine. He's extremely efficient. He always has really high amounts of air yards. Last year, he had 1,359 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns. So I would take him. The reason why he is number 5 on my list is because of that situation where, like, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, I would say tier 1, tier 2. Like, I don't want to break it down this far, but, I think Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and Tyreek Hill are kind of in a tier of their own where they're going to be top 5 guys, where CeeDee Lamb could finish 5 or 6 if he has a really good season, or he could finish much lower. His schedule is also not easy. So, you also have that situation with CeeDee Lamb as well. So that's kind of why I have him ranked 5 here, but, we'll have to see what happens with CeeDee Lamb. Number 6, I got Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs really has become one of my favorite wide receivers in fantasy football, but there's some issues here with Steph. And the reason why I say there's problems with Stephon Diggs is because last year at the end of the football season, if you're watching the playoffs, there's a big argument on the sideline between Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, and Diggs was kind of yelling at him, putting his hands in the air like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? This was all on the sideline, and, you kind of just saw, like, an explosion for Stephon Diggs, and then he doesn't show up to a couple of, mandatory minicamp practices, and he's either in or he's out or he's up or he's down, and it doesn't seem like he's too happy with the football team right now. And part of me is in this boat where, I don't think Buffalo will move on from him or move off him because he is ridiculously talented and ridiculously good, and they need a good wide receiver to pair with Josh Allen. But I think that Stephon Diggs is in one of these positions where, if something were to happen and he were to change football teams and he were to get traded to somewhere that wasn't good, or I think there's 3 teams in the NFL right now that if they got Stephon Diggs, he would be equivalent. Cincinnati, and maybe even not that because they already got Jamar Chase. Kansas City, he might even be better in Kansas City. And then obviously Buffalo. And so if he goes anywhere else, I just don't see him having the same amount of fantasy football success as he's had with Buffalo. And because of those questions, and then there's a lack of buy-in thing for me where this player, if he really is not bought into what the team is doing and he's frustrated with the quarterback and he's frustrated with the team, we've seen this happen with him before where he gets frustrated with the team. That could lead to an explosion for Stephon Diggs where he just ends up being a calamitous bust. Or bust is strong. He ends up being not as effective as a player as we thought. And so that's why, stability is why I have him ranked where I have him. He's currently wide receiver 6. So, I have him ahead of CeeDee Lamb. I have CeeDee Lamb ahead of him right now because there seems to be a lack of stability for him. But if he's healthy, he's good, and he's motivated and focused, and he wants to be a Bill, there's no reason why you can't believe that he's not in the top 5, and I think he's a great pick as well. Number 7 is A.J. Brown. Lower on this list because I love A.J. Brown. Everyone knows that, and he's an explosion waiting to happen. He's an absolute freaking explosion waiting to happen, but the big thing with A.J. Brown is target share and passing opportunity in the Eagles' offense. He's clearly their best wide receiver, so they're going to toss the rock to him all the time. They're not going to have problems with that. Last year, he had 146 targets, but they're a football team that throws it 516 times a season. And, I would not be surprised if they're around or under 520 pass attempts this year. If that's the case, obviously he's not going to be able to reach that height of 170 or more targets like some of these top 5, 6 wide receivers can get to. I don't think A.J. Brown can hit that ceiling, but that the way that they utilize A.J. Brown as a red zone target, the way that they utilize him through the air, 1,700 air yards, he is going to be a guy that gets a lot of catches. He's going to get a lot of receiving yards. He's going to get a lot of receiving touchdowns. And that's just A.J. Brown. And there are going to be weeks where he gets 10 points. And then there are going to be weeks where he gets 45. And so I have him 7 because of his explosive nature. But like I said, I think Philly is obviously, in a situation where I believe they have a new offensive coordinator. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that. But no, A.J. Brown is going to get his targets. It's just not going to be as many as the top 6 would. So I put him there in that spot, but I definitely think he does have opportunity to jump up into the top 3 or 4 if he has a really good season. Amon-Ra St. Brown is my number 8 guy on this list. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he is one of my favorite wide receivers now in the NFL, one of my favorite PPR wide receivers in the NFL. He does a lot of really, really good things with the ball in his hands, and he has become one of the more efficient guys in fantasy football. And when I say that, it's because he basically plays the slot most of the game. And he doesn't have much explosive nature, but he's a guy that catches, we talk about him and A.J. Brown had 146 targets last year. A.J. Brown had 88 catches. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 106. And Jameson Williams is going to miss the early part of the season. They don't really have another guy to replace Jameson Williams at this point. I believe. Hold on, let me check the Detroit Lions depth chart because I might be talking out of my face. Yeah, they added Marvin Jones, but at this point, it's going to be Amon-Ra and T.J. Hawkinson left, so it's going to be Amon-Ra or bust. I think this season, his strength of schedule right now is okay. It's not great, but he is ridiculously good. Good route runner, can catch the ball a lot. I think receptions are going to be his big thing. I have him in this slot because there is a lack of efficiency, so you look at some of the stuff like I just talked about, air yards for A.J. Brown, 146 targets. He had 1,700 plus air yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 905 air yards. So he is not a receiver that you're going to see, take the top off the defense and have huge plays like that or catch the ball through the air like that. And because he's only at 905 air yards, I think that caps him at what he can do efficiency-wise and production-wise. He's not great in the red zone. He only had 6 touchdowns last year. So to me, obviously, can he improve in the red zone? Yes. And get better in that aspect? Yes. But this guy is a pure PPR upside pick. And currently he is going as the wide receiver 14. So if you go into that second round and you just need a base, I need consistency on a week-to-week basis, I would take Amon-Ra. He's wide receiver 7 in 2022. I really like him coming into this year. I think there's going to be good production for him, and I think that there'll be a lot of catches coming his way. All right, let's talk about the last 4 guys that we have here. Davante Adams is number 9. I don't like Davante Adams, to be honest with you, this year. I'm having a tough time taking Davante Adams in leagues. And the reason why I say I'm having a tough time taking Davante Adams in leagues is because he's 30 years old. So he's starting to hit that threshold where he's either going to get, there's some kind of injury that occurs or he goes downhill. 2, the Raiders right now replaced Derek Carr with Jimmy Garoppolo, which, he's held up some good wide receivers in the past. And I'm like, okay, that could be good news for Davante Adams. But right now, Garoppolo's been dealing with a foot problem. And with that situation happening, what are you going to do with that? What are the Raiders going to do with that? Because now Davante Adams is kind of in a situation where he might not have a quarterback going into the season. If the Raiders end up cutting him or whatever, they're going to have to go with the backup quarterback who, it'll just be bad. So, he could force his way out of LA and Las Vegas and try to find another team to go land on. The Jets were rumored to be interested in him when he was on the market. Doesn't sound like he's going to leave the Raiders. But he had 180 targets last year. Obviously, they love to use him. 2,130 air yards, 14 touchdowns, 1,516 receiving yards. Like, there's some good things here, but it's clear. Expert consensus right now has him 8. It's clear that everyone knows that Adams is going to kind of fall off a little bit, and it's going to be time to move off of Adams. At this point, I still think there's value for him. He's wide receiver. I mean, he's going off the board as ADP of 15. And he could go lower. And it's like, if he's late second, early third, like, that's a great value for Davante Adams, and you kind of have to take him, which is why, obviously, I still have him ranked here. But I definitely think that there's some reek of bust going on around Davante Adams, because this offense wasn't great last year with Derek Carr, and now they have a quarterback that has a foot problem and hasn't practiced and might be cut and all this stuff. And if they go into the season with a backup or signing somebody off, of free agency, and, it's just not a good situation for Davante Adams. It's really not. All directions point down for Davante Adams at this point. And I think, if Jimmy's there and he's playing, there's some positivity there for Davante Adams. I think he could actually put up some good numbers and be good. I think he could do maybe just under what he did last year. Slightly less efficient, but that's still a really good season. Wide receiver 3 is what he finished as. He could finish at wide receiver 6 or 7 with Jimmy Garoppolo and still have a decline season. So I think there's still some good things there with him, but it's kind of like a buyer beware at this point. You put the big beware sticker on Davante Adams and talk about where he could actually be in a position where things could go in a net negative direction. All right, let's talk about the next guy that we have, which is Garrett Wilson. I told you we were going to talk about Garrett Wilson. He is number 10 on this list. Adams was 9. 10 is Garrett Wilson. Rick and I have talked about this guy before. He's going to be on our breakout show, so you're going to hear a lot about Garrett Wilson as the offseason goes along. He is a freaking stud muffin of a wide receiver. Jets obviously get Aaron Rodgers. They add him to the team. Rodgers has oohed and awed and gawked over Garrett Wilson. They seem to have a good connection. And there's some negatives, I think, that are going on with the Jets in terms of production and stuff like that. And I've talked about those before, some concerns that I have. But Garrett Wilson has upside to be, he had a great rookie season, and he has upside to be a wide receiver 1 in all of fantasy football if he produces. I don't know that that'll happen this year, but I think, top 5 is definitely within the range of outcomes for Garrett Wilson this year. And if you're talking about a guy that you can get somewhere in the second round, I think that's really good news. Like, this is a guy that I would invest in, going into drafts. He's right around the same vicinity as Davante Adams, so, I mean, obviously he's lower on my list. I would take Adams over him, but I think that there's a lot of good things to be said. You talk about air yards being around 1,500 to 2,000. He's in that vicinity. He gets that production. He had 447 targets last year. Obviously, 4 receiving touchdowns. If that flips and he gets 10, 11 receiving touchdowns, that changes his whole entire fortunes. Obviously, he's got to turn those 147 targets into something a little bit more explosive. I think with Aaron Rodgers, he can do that. The quarterback change is the big thing for Garrett Wilson. He was wide receiver 21 last year in 17 games played. I think he can jump up into the top 10 and be a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football with Aaron Rodgers. Buyer beware on that offense, though. I don't think it's going to be as good as everyone anticipates it's going to be, but there's still some good things coming for it. So Garrett Wilson, definitely a buy. Top 10 for me. Get him on your team. Next 3 guys are an interesting discussion because they've all been kind of ranked around the same area, and I'm just gonna throw them all out at once, and then we'll end the show. But they all have kind of been ranked around the same area, and I'm gonna explain why I have them where I do. And I'm gonna throw a 13th extra rank in here for you. But the last 2 guys on the top 12 for 2023 fantasy football, T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, and then 13 for me would be Jalen Waddle. So the reason why these guys are ranked as they are, I did a ton of research because I do believe all 3 are kind of similar. Higgins is at 11 for me because he has the best opportunity to have success and score touchdowns in that Cincinnati offense. You talk about his opportunity share. He caught a lot of passes last year, and he had a lot of targets. He's in a really pass-heavy, I think they had 610 pass attempts last year, Cincinnati Bengals. So they're in a pass-heavy offense with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And T. Higgins, if you check out his reception perception on Matt Harmon's reception perception website, it's ridiculous. His chart is outstanding. So I rank him ahead of these two other guys because of those facts, because of those situations. I think that he is the safest bet and the best bet to be a top-end wide receiver of these three guys if I had to choose one. I like all three. I think if I was on the board and all three were available, Higgins would be the first guy to go. If Higgins wasn't there, the next guy to go would be Devonta Smith. And Devonta Smith has, if you look up his reception perception chart, it's absolutely insane. It is really good. The production that he has put up, it's better than Higgins and it's better than Waddle. And he had 146 targets last year. The only reason why I have him lower is because T. Higgins has a better opportunity to get more targets than with 610 total opportunities last year with that team. They're pass heavy. They're pass friendly. The Eagles had 100 less pass attempts this year. So to me, it's entirely based on, because they're going to get him the ball. They're going to feed him the rock. He's going to get a bunch of targets. He's going to get a lot of opportunity, obviously. But Devonta Smith, to me, is one of those guys that, because he's in an offense that likes to run the football, because he's in an offense that is only going to throw it between 500 and 525 times, there could be a lack of opportunity. If somebody else ascends into that offense, obviously definitely not going to happen, but it's going to take some opportunity away from Devonta Smith. That's why I got T. Higgins ahead of Devonta Smith just on that opportunity, because their reception perception charts are very similar and their quarterback offensive situations are very similar. So, obviously Joe Burrow is, I think, a far better quarterback than Jalen Hurts, but, I think they're kind of in similar situations and they're very close in that facet. And so I look at some of those variables. The other thing is, Cincinnati has a easier strength of schedule than the Eagles do, so I put T. Higgins ahead of him. But Devonta Smith, I love. I'm shocked that Devonta Smith is wide receiver 16 on the expert consensus. It's not that massive of a difference on my rankings to theirs, a 4-spot difference, but I think he should definitely be higher considering what he did last year and how the production that he put up. But I would take T. Higgins over Devonta Smith. And then the only reason why Jalen Waddle is behind these three guys is specifically because I don't know what the Dolphins are going to look like this year. Obviously, I love Tyreek Hill. I do like Jalen Waddle as well, but they're in one of the toughest divisions. I said this about Stefon Diggs. They're in one of the toughest divisions defensively in the NFL. And there's going to be a lot of, the Jets, Patriots, and Bills are all going to give the Dolphins fits when it comes to, production and all of that stuff. Waddle has, a lot of tools in the toolbox, but, he has, I would say, the worst reception perception profile of the three guys. He has one of the hardest schedules of the three guys. And, the Dolphins, they had 550 plus pass attempts last year. And, obviously Waddle got a lot of those, but they love Tyreek Hill and they love to feed him the ball. And I think that's going to cap him for now. So wide receiver 13, I definitely think he can finish in the top 12, but wide receiver 13 is there. I also do think it's hard to have, one, let alone multiple guys in the top 12 that have, a team that has multiple guys in the top 12. It's hard to do. And T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown, I think, have a better shot of doing that than Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So, of course, can Jalen Waddle do that? Yes. I think you're safe with taking any one of these guys in an interchangeable facet. If you don't get, if I'm in a draft and I don't get T. Higgins and Devonta Smith and I'm on the board and I'm looking at wide receiver, I would love to get Jalen Waddle. Same thing if I didn't have T. Higgins or Jalen Waddle, I'd love to get Devonta Smith, and vice versa with Smith and Waddle. So it's like, this is just the order of which I would take them. I think they're all equal. They're all in the same tier, and I would be happy with any one of these guys coming off the board. But there you go. There's my entire rankings list. It took me a little while to get there. 40 minutes. Holy crap. A little while. But anyway, my top 12 right now: Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Stefon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Devonta Smith. We have a lot coming up in the next couple of weeks as we get prepared for, obviously, August and big draft month. In 4 weeks, we're going to be switching to 3 episodes a week, so stay tuned for that. We got top 12 running backs and top 50 rankings coming up soon, so stick around for that. See you later, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.